$4.5 billion. One party paid for it. Goldman Sachs sent the invoice. Not a metaphor. Not an approximation. Between 2012 and 2013, a Malaysian sovereign wealth fund called 1MDB raised $6.5 billion across 3 bond deals. Goldman Sachs underwrote every one of them. And by the time regulators in 6 countries had finished their investigations, $4.5 billion of that money had been stolen, laundered through shell companies, private jets, luxury real estate, casinos, and a Hollywood film production company that made one of the most celebrated films of its era. The man at the center of all of it was a pudgy, unassuming Malaysian financier named Joe Low, someone most people had never heard of, who allegedly used a Malaysian government fund to throw parties for celebrities, buy a $250 million super yacht, and fund a film whose actors would later be required by the Department of Justice to return their Oscar gifts. We'll get to those parties. But first, you need to understand why a bank like Goldman Sachs was the only institution in the world willing to execute these deals, and what that tells us about who actually ran the risk. Malaysia, 2013. The country had just celebrated 50 years of independence and was aggressively positioning itself as a modern emerging economy. Najib Razak was Prime Minister. He had overseen the creation of 1MDB, One Malaysia Development Berhad, in 2009, officially a sovereign wealth fund designed to attract foreign investment and fuel national development. On paper, 1MDB was supposed to operate like Singapore's Temasek or Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund. In practice, according to prosecutors in the United States, Malaysia, Singapore, Switzerland, and the United Arab Emirates, it operated as a personal slush fund. Najib Razak was convicted by a Malaysian court in July 2020 on 7 counts of criminal breach of trust, abuse of power, and money laundering in connection with 1MDB and related entities. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Multiple other charges remained under separate proceedings. His legal team continued to pursue appeals through 2024. The man who allegedly designed the financial architecture of the theft was not a government official. He was Joe Low, Low Taik Joe, a 20-something Malaysian businessman who had studied at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and who had, while still a student, cultivated relationships with Middle Eastern royalty and the children of Southeast Asian political dynasties. According to the U.S. Department of Justice indictment filed in November 2018, Joe Low was the central figure who coordinated the misappropriation of 1MDB funds. He has denied all allegations and has not been extradited. As of the time of this script's production, his whereabouts are unknown. But Joe Low needed a bank, a real one, a credible one whose name on a bond prospectus would reassure international investors and shut down questions. He found 2 men inside Goldman Sachs. Tim Leissner was Goldman's chairman for Southeast Asia. By any standard, he was a rising star, connected, charming, deeply embedded in the political fabric of the region. Roger Ng was a managing director in Malaysia. Together, according to court documents and Leissner's own guilty plea, they structured 3 bond issuances for 1MDB that collectively raised $6.5 billion. Goldman collected approximately $600 million in fees on those deals. The industry standard for such transactions was 1% to 2%. Goldman charged between 9% and 11%. Leissner pleaded guilty in August 2018 to conspiring to launder money and conspiring to violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. In his plea, he admitted to paying bribes to government officials in Malaysia and Abu Dhabi to secure the bond deals and to personally enriching himself. Roger Ng was convicted in March 2022 by a federal jury in Brooklyn after a 9-week trial. He was later sentenced to 10 years in prison. Now, here's what nobody asked loudly enough at the time. Goldman's internal risk officers flagged the abnormal fee structure on these bond deals before they were approved. According to the DOJ statement of facts filed alongside Goldman's own deferred prosecution agreement in October 2020, Goldman employees raised concerns about the extraordinary fees. Those concerns were overruled. The deals went through. The $600 million was booked as revenue. We'll come back to what Goldman's leadership knew and when, because it is the most important question this story raises. Hold that. 2012 Donstead. The money from the first two bond issuances had arrived in 1MDB accounts, and almost immediately, it began to move. According to the U.S. DOJ civil forfeiture complaint filed in July 2016 and the subsequent criminal indictment, funds were diverted from 1MDB through a labyrinth of shell companies in the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, Singapore, Luxembourg, and Switzerland. Joe Low allegedly controlled several of these entities directly or through associates. Kadam Al-Kubaisi, chairman of the Abu Dhabi state investment vehicle ABAR, was named in the DOJ civil complaint as a participant in the diversion scheme. Al-Kubaisi was separately convicted in the UAE in 2016 on corruption charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The amounts moving were not subtle. $100 million here, $200 million there. Within months, according to court documents, funds traced to 1MDB sources were appearing in accounts connected to luxury real estate purchases in Beverly Hills, New York, and London. A $250 million super yacht called the Equanimity was purchased and registered through a chain of offshore entities. And then came the parties. Joe Low had a strategy. His presence at the most visible, most photographed, most exclusive events in the world was not incidental. It was the mechanism. To sustain a fraud of this scale, you needed legitimacy. Legitimacy in 2012 meant proximity to the global celebrity machine. It meant Las Vegas nightclubs with seven-figure bar tabs, documented in DOJ filings. It meant commissioning private concerts from artists whose fees ran into the hundreds of thousands of dollars per appearance. It meant being photographed in the right rooms. Xavier Justo saw some of what was happening from a different angle. A former executive at PetroSaudi International, a Saudi-connected entity that was one of 1MDB's early joint venture partners, Justo had access to internal company documents that he believed showed PetroSaudi had received payments diverted from 1MDB. In 2015, he copied those documents and attempted to sell them. He was arrested in Thailand, convicted of extortion in 2015, and sentenced to 3 years. He later told journalists, including those at the Wall Street Journal, that he had been set up, that the charges were engineered to silence him before the documents could reach the press. Thai authorities disputed this account. What is undisputed, the documents he copied eventually reached the investigative website Sarawak Report and the Wall Street Journal. They became the evidentiary foundation for the global investigation. Sarawak Report published the leaked documents in February 2015. The Wall Street Journal began its own investigation around the same time, ultimately producing a body of reporting that led directly to the regulatory actions and became the foundation for the book Billion Dollar Whale by Tom Wright and Bradley Hope, published in 2018. Malaysian parliament members had been raising questions about 1MDB's mounting debt as early as 2012. Those questions were managed, deflected, and in some cases, the questioners were investigated under Malaysia's sedition laws. The oversight mechanism in Malaysia was not functioning as oversight. 2015 was when the architecture began to crack, publicly, irreversibly. The Wall Street Journal, working from documents, including those linked to Justo's cash, reported that approximately $681 million had been transferred into personal bank accounts belonging to Najib Razak. Najib initially denied the reports. Then his government offered an explanation. The funds were a donation from the Saudi royal family. That explanation was later abandoned. Malaysian prosecutors ultimately alleged the funds originated from 1MDB. Najib was convicted on related charges in July 2020. In the United States, the Department of Justice launched a civil asset forfeiture case in July 2016. Attorney General Loretta Lynch announced it at a press conference in Washington. She described it as the largest kleptocracy case in the history of the DOJ. The civil complaint alleged that more than $1 billion in assets within U.S. jurisdiction had been purchased with funds traced to 1MDB, including real estate in New York and California, a private jet, and the rights to 2 major films. One of those films was The Wolf of Wall Street. Red Granite Pictures, co-founded by Reza Aziz, Najib Razak's stepson, had produced the film. The DOJ's civil complaint alleged that the funds used to finance Red Granite's film productions, including The Wolf of Wall Street, were traceable to money diverted from 1MDB. Reza Aziz reached a settlement with Malaysian prosecutors in 2020, agreeing to return assets valued at approximately $107 million. He was not criminally convicted. In a statement, he maintained he did not believe the funds he received were misappropriated. Leonardo DiCaprio, who starred in the film and who had received gifts including a Picasso painting and a Jean-Michel Basquiat work as documented in the DOJ civil complaint, was not accused of wrongdoing. He voluntarily returned items and funds connected to 1MDB-linked sources, cooperating with investigators. Here is the reframe that most coverage of 1MDB never fully lands on. This was not primarily a Malaysian corruption story. It was a Goldman Sachs story. Goldman's Malaysian subsidiary pleaded guilty to a U.S. federal criminal charge in October 2020 as part of a deferred prosecution agreement. The parent entity, Goldman Sachs Group, agreed to pay $2.9 billion in penalties across the United States, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Singapore, and the United Kingdom. $2.9 billion. The largest financial penalty in the bank's 150-year history, and Goldman's stock rose 4% in the week following the settlement announcement. What happened to the people involved? Tim Leissner was sentenced in May 2023 to time served, effectively no additional prison time beyond his cooperation period, after years of cooperating with federal prosecutors. The cooperation was described by prosecutors as substantial. Roger Ng received 10 years in federal prison. Andrea Vella, Goldman's co-head of investment banking for Asia Pacific, was permanently barred from the U.S. banking industry by the Federal Reserve in December 2019. He was not criminally charged. Goldman's then CEO, David Solomon, inherited the aftermath. In an earnings call following the settlement, he described the conduct of Leissner and Ng as unacceptable and stated the bank was committed to ensuring such conduct could not recur. Goldman's compliance upgrades and executive accountability review were extensive and extensively documented in the bank's own filings. In Malaysia, the government of Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, which came to power in May 2018 on a platform explicitly targeting 1MDB accountability, launched criminal proceedings against dozens of individuals and institutions. Goldman's Malaysian entity criminal conviction represented one of the most significant outcomes in the global case. Najib Razak's conviction in July 2020, 12 years in prison, 5 years disqualification from public office, and a fine of approximately 210 million ringgit was upheld by the Malaysian federal court in August 2022, making it final. Joe Low, indicted by the U.S. Department of Justice in November 2018, facing charges of money laundering conspiracy and violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, has not been apprehended. He has denied all allegations through his representatives. Countries including Malaysia, the United States, and Singapore have sought his extradition. As of 2024, he has not been found. Malaysia's government reached separate agreements with Goldman in July 2020, in which Goldman agreed to pay at least $3.9 billion to the Malaysian government and guarantee recovery of any shortfall, the largest ever recovery obtained by Malaysia from a foreign institution. The Malaysian public, whose pension contributions through institutions like the Employees Provident Fund had provided the backdrop of national credibility that made 1MDB bonds sellable, received none of the direct human accounting that the numbers deserved. Workers who had paid into government-linked funds spent years watching legal proceedings in multiple jurisdictions while politicians argued about restitution timelines. For Xavier Justo, the man who copied the documents that started the unraveling, the legal resolution was quieter. His Thai conviction remained on record. His account of being framed was reported extensively by the Wall Street Journal and other outlets, but no Malaysian or international court formally vindicated his account of the circumstances of his arrest. He returned to private life in Switzerland. Here is what this story actually tells us. A sovereign wealth fund existed to develop a nation. It raised $6.5 billion on the credibility of that nation's government. A bank collected $600 million to make that happen, charging fees 9 times the market standard. Its own risk officers questioned it. The deals went through. When it collapsed, and it always collapses, the bank paid $2.9 billion, settled without apparent entity criminal conviction, watched its stock price recover, and continued operating as one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world. The man who allegedly orchestrated the theft remains free. Najib Razak, the sitting prime minister under whom all of this occurred, served as his own country's most powerful figure for 9 years after 1MDB was created and is now in prison. The lesson here is not that one man was greedy. The lesson is that a financial system designed to move money across borders, across jurisdictions, across currencies without asking too many questions is not a bug. It's the product. And the product was sold by institutions with gold-lettered names on glass towers in Manhattan and London and Hong Kong, and no one who ran those institutions spent a single night in a cell. $4.5 billion stolen in plain sight. With an invitation list. Here is what we want to know from you. Goldman Sachs paid $2.9 billion and called it a settlement. Should that be the end of the story for an institution? Or should a financial entity that facilitated the largest government theft in modern history face consequences that no check can cover? Leave your answer in the comments. Goldman was the most expensive lesson in what happens when a bank's fee appetite overrides its compliance function. But Goldman was not the only institution that should have failed that test and didn't. The same pattern repeats. Different banks, different countries, different weekends. The same quiet decision in a quiet room that never reaches a courtroom. And the same men collecting the same bonuses the following year. We have other stories to tell, and it is worse.